My husband took everything in the divorce. He had no idea what he was taking. My name is Evelyn, and for over a decade, I believed I was building a life alongside someone who loved me. But when the divorce came, he did not just want to leave. He wanted to take everything. The assets, my family's ins, even the custody of our children. I accepted it in silence without contesting. On the outside, it looked like surrender. On the inside, something much deeper was being born. This is the story of a woman who chose not to react with screams, but with strategy. It is about someone who decided to wait for the right moment to act, and when she did, nothing was ever the same again. I'm happy to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment with the name of the city from which you are watching so I can see how far my story has reached. Ethan did not raise his voice when he demanded everything. He simply slid the papers across the table, pointing out each clause like someone listing groceries at a market. The ins, the accounts, the cars, even the custody of the children. I listened in silence, feeling each word like a weight pressing against my chest. My face remained still, but inside, everything was collapsing. Still, I did not react because any reaction would be exactly what he expected. I observed his steady hands and the slight smile of someone who already considers himself the winner. I thought of the grandfather who taught me to listen more than I speak. I thought of Noah and Lila, and the look in their eyes when they asked if everything would be okay. I swallowed the pain carefully, like someone tucking something fragile away in the back of a drawer. Ethan believed my silence was weakness, and that made him too comfortable. When he finished, he crossed his arms and looked at me as if he were being generous. He said this was best for everyone and that I should accept it to avoid further exhaustion. My breathing was controlled, almost rehearsed. I did not argue, I did not cry, and I did not ask for anything. I simply held his gaze for a few seconds that felt far too long. Then came the final sentence, spoken with calculated calmness, like an ultimatum disguised as advice. He leaned forward slightly, certain he had ended the conversation. If you want peace, accept all of this. I picked up the pen without hesitation. Rachel shot me a quick look, the kind that mixes surprise and warning, but she said nothing. I knew she expected a pause, a question, or any sign of doubt. But my hand did not shake when I signed the first proposal. Each signature was a silent cut, and I made them all with precision. Ethan relaxed in his chair, satisfied. While I signed, I felt something strange. The pain was still there, but it no longer commanded my movements. It was as if I were observing the scene from the outside, analyzing every detail. Rachel cleared her throat, perhaps expecting me to back down. I simply returned the papers, maintaining a firm posture. It was not surrender, although it looked like it. Harper was leaning near the door, far too quiet for someone who had always been impulsive. I noticed her attentive, almost suspicious gaze following my every gesture. She knew me well enough to know when something was out of place. When our eyes met, I did not see pity there, but curiosity. I took a deep breath, stood up, and adjusted my bag on my shoulder. No more words were spoken. Ethan believed everything had ended there. Harper did not. Harper observes and notices something different in me. I got into the car and closed the door slowly. The silence finally enveloped me, heavy and necessary. I held the steering wheel for a few seconds as if I needed that contact to remember I was still there. It was then that I allowed a single tear to fall. There were no sobs, just that contained gesture, almost respectful of my own pain. I wiped my face and started the engine. As I drove, images of the past surfaced without warning. My grandfather walking through the inns, Ethan promising loyalty, my children running through the garden. Everything felt distant but not lost. Something inside me was reorganizing itself silently. My gaze in the rearview mirror no longer carried despair. There was exhaustion, yes, but also clarity. I understood now that losing on paper did not mean losing over time. Everything he took came with a price he did not yet know. I parked and sat there for a few more seconds, feeling my heart beat steadily. He thought he had won, and that was the most dangerous detail. He did not realize he had just given me my greatest advantage. Clara called me to sit on the porch, as she had done since I was a child. Her experienced eyes analyzed my face carefully. She spoke about justice, about fighting, and about not letting them erase what we built. I listened to everything respectfully. When I replied that it was not yet time, she frowned but did not insist. I explained that some battles are not won on the first move. Clara sighed like someone who recognizes something familiar in that answer. She also knew the value of time, even when urgency pressed. She held my hand and said she trusted me, even though she did not understand everything. While we talked, my mind was already working in silence. Every word from Ethan, every sign clause, it all fit together like pieces of a larger game. It was not anger that moved me but strategy. I needed him to believe fully in his own victory. Clara watched me in silence for a few seconds before smiling slightly. Perhaps she saw the same glint my grandfather had when he planned something important. A glimpse of a plan forms in my mind. Rachel insisted on reviewing the terms once more. She said there were still loopholes and that we could renegotiate. I thanked her but refused. She became visibly frustrated, pacing back and forth in the office. I remained calm because I knew that any delay could arouse suspicion. She asked if I realized what I was giving up. I replied that I did, with more certainty than she expected. It was not ignorance, it was a choice. Rachel took a deep breath and agreed to follow my decision, even without fully understanding it. Harper did not have the same patience. She confronted me as soon as we were alone, asking what I was hiding. Her tone was not accusatory but worried. I looked at her for a few seconds, measuring how much I should reveal. I smiled slightly and said only that she needed to trust me. It was not the time to explain everything. Harper shook her head restlessly but did not insist further. What are you hiding from me? That night, searching through old boxes in the family home, I found my grandfather's notebook. The yellowed pages carried simple notes, yet they were full of meaning. I read carefully, as if he were speaking to me again. Every sentence seemed like advice left for the right moment. In the middle of the notebook, one sentence was firmly underlined. I stopped there, feeling a shiver run through my body. It was as if everything suddenly aligned, past and present. My grandfather always believed that haste was the enemy of truth. I closed my eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. I knew exactly what I needed to do. It would not be a direct or immediate confrontation. It would be waiting, observation, and patience. I closed the notebook carefully and held it against my chest. The decision was made, and there was no more room for doubt. So, this is what I am going to do. The fork had barely touched my plate when Harper leaned over the table with a sharp gaze. I saw Ethan yesterday. I swallowed hard without asking, but she continued. He was with another woman. At a downtown restaurant. Kisses, laughter. Not discreet at all. The world did not collapse around me because, to be honest, it had already crumbled inside me a long time ago. I just kept my fork in the air and pretended I was still surprised. Harper's expression changed as the silence stretched on. She expected an explosion, tears, or righteous anger. But she found none of that. Only my steady hand bringing the fork to my mouth, chewing as if she had commented on the weather. Aren't you going to say anything? She asked, frustrated. I sighed deeply and placed the utensil on the plate. I looked her in the eyes and said calmly, "Thank you for telling me." She stepped back as if she did not recognize me. But what she did not know was that this was not new to me. That woman could be one of many. What mattered was not the romantic betrayal, but what it hid. Harper went quiet for a moment and almost unintentionally murmured, "You already knew? You already knew?" I slowly raised my glass and took a sip, staring into space for a second before answering. I suspected. Now I am certain. My voice was so neutral it sounded rehearsed. Harper watched me as if she expected the shell to crack at any moment, but there were no more cracks. Only concrete. I returned to my plate, but this time my eyes were elsewhere. I no longer saw the restaurant. I saw the pieces of a game board slowly fitting together. The pain became less sharp when it began to make sense. Ethan did not just want to leave me. He wanted to dismantle me. But for that, he would need to believe I was blind. Harper tried to touch my hand on the table, but I pulled back gently. It was my war now, and I needed my emotional armor intact. He isn't worth all this, Evelyn. I smiled sadly. It isn't about him being worth it. It is about me deserving something better. I took a pen from my bag and wrote something on a folded napkin. Harper frowned. "What are you doing?" I folded the paper carefully and put it in my pocket. It was the name of a person. And a beginning. Evelyn notes something on a paper and puts it away. That same afternoon, I contacted a name Harper knew well, but one she would never imagine I had kept. Marcus Reed, an old family friend, now a private investigator. Discreet, methodical, loyal to those who deserved it. I called him from a public phone, as if I were in a scene from an old movie. The paranoia was not an exaggeration. Ethan was too smart to leave tracks, and I needed to be even smarter. We met in a quiet park where mothers pushed swings and children laughed, unaware that there, on the bench next to the fountain, a war was beginning in whispers. I handed him a sheet with 2 names, Ethan Hamilton and a second name that Harper had mentioned in passing. I won everything on her. And on the money. Marcus listened more than he spoke. He took mental notes and absorbed my requests with the efficiency of someone who knows that every detail carries weight. He did not question me or try to understand my emotions. He simply nodded, as if he had been summoned for this mission long before my call. Before standing up, he looked into my eyes and asked, "What is the priority? The woman or the money?" I did not have to think. The money first. She can wait. And then, with an almost invisible nod, he disappeared among the trees in the park. Follow the money and the woman. In that order. The answers began to arrive in pieces, like crumbs left by Marcus in encrypted messages. Each piece revealed more than I expected, but also confirmed what I had already sensed. Ethan had hidden accounts under shell names, non-existent companies moving absurd amounts of money, and all those transfers passed in some way through my network of ins. The shock was cold. I read the reports like someone watching a documentary about their own ruin. He did not just want to destroy our marriage, he wanted to bury my legacy along with him. Marcus was clear. This isn't just betrayal. This is a crime. And it is federal. I began to understand why Ethan put so much pressure on me to sign everything quickly. The faster he controlled the ins, the easier it would be to wash money without me noticing. But he made a mistake. He underestimated the calculated slowness of my pain. Because I did not react out of weakness. I reacted with strategy. Marcus promised to gather concrete evidence. And at the end of that week, I received the first envelope with documents. There were more than just numbers there. There were his footprints. His pride. His ruin. This is not just betrayal. It is a crime. It was Rachel who called me in a hurry after checking a deed. Her voice trembled with anger. The Valley Inn. "Evelyn, it was transferred without you signing. I went to the registry. I asked for copies. And there it was, your signature perfectly forged." For a moment my hands shook. Not from fear but from disbelief. How did he have the courage to touch the oldest inn? The one that bore my grandfather's name? It was as if he were spitting on the past, as if he were declaring war on my memories. Rachel held my arm, trying to contain the storm that was rising. "Evelyn, he forged your signature. This is extremely serious." I nodded, still staring at the paper. It was a forgery that bled. But now, I did not just want to recover what was mine. I wanted to expose what he was. Not with scandals but with evidence. I returned home with a determination I had not felt since the days my grandfather taught me how to take care of the inn's account books. "He forged your signature, Evelyn." That night I sat in my old room, now filled with documents, notes, and flashes of memories. I separated everything Marcus had given me. Each page had its emotional weight. It was as if pieces of my marriage were turning into evidence against the man who pretended to love me. I chose a red envelope, the same type my grandfather used to store important contracts. I put everything I could inside it. Not just papers but the certainty that I was no longer an abandoned woman. I was the heir to an empire forged with sweat, and now also with silence and strategy. I kept the envelope inside a box with a metal clasp and hid it under the loose floorboard of the closet, as we used to do with old letters. Clara entered slowly, observing everything without asking. She knew. She always knew when I was about to act. "Are you going to use that now?" she whispered. I shook my head. "Not yet. When he feels safe, I will deliver it." "Not yet. When he feels safe, I will deliver it." The conciliation room smelled of old paper and broken promises. When Ethan entered with decisive steps and shoulders held high, it was as if he were carrying an invisible trophy. He wore a tailored dark suit and that perfume he always overdid when he wanted to impress. There was a glint in his eyes that was not joy, it was pure arrogance. the look of someone who believes wholeheartedly that he has won. My heart beat calmly. It was no longer love that stirred inside me, it was silence. And that silence was my weapon. Ethan approached the table with a crooked smile. He sat down with the naturalness of someone who feels at home, even though that room represented the implosion of our history. When the judge began the hearing, Ethan looked at me with false compassion and said in a low voice, "You seem to be at peace, Evelyn." I simply smiled. My smile was not sweet, nor was it victorious. It was enigmatic. The peace he saw was not surrender. It was strategy. He did not know it, but he was about to sign his own downfall. Rachel sat beside me with the folder of documents between us. She shot me a quick look of confirmation. I nodded with a slight wave, without taking my eyes off the signature I was about to provide. Ethan seemed increasingly comfortable, as if he were savoring every second of the outcome he had engineered. "After this, I hope we can maintain a peaceful coexistence for the sake of the children," he said with the hypocrisy that only the very confident use. I signed the document without blinking. The sound of the pen on the paper echoed inside me like the sound of a gate closing. But what he did not know was that another door was opening. Ethan leaned back satisfied. He crossed his hands over his chest and exchanged knowing looks with his lawyer. For him that was the end. For me it was only the turning point. I looked at Harper sitting in the back row. She watched me in silence, trying to decipher what my calmness meant. "You seem to be at peace, Evelyn." The judge asked the lawyers to finalize the records. Rachel organized the papers with precision, but her tense jaw revealed what she thought of it all. I, on the other hand, kept my hands on my lap, firm and serene. Ethan was radiating confidence. "I'm glad everything was resolved without conflict," he said, smiling like a satisfied diplomat. It was funny how he tried to look civilized while stealing everything I built. But I let him. On purpose. Harper approached as I gathered my belongings. Her fingers touched mine for a moment. It was a small gesture but full of meaning. Her eyes begged me for answers. "Why did you do this? Why did you let everything slip away?" But she did not ask. She knew me well enough to know there was something behind it. Harper was my friend, my silent guardian. And there, at that moment, even without understanding, she was by my side. "He doesn't deserve your silence," she whispered, almost without moving her lips. I lowered my eyes and squeezed her hand in response. I knew it hurt her as much as it did me to see that scene. But there were things she did not yet know. And when she knew, everything would make sense. People think that a scream is a sign of strength, but sometimes it is the silence that holds the sword. I was not giving up. I was retreating to make space for the truth. As Harper walked back to the bench, I glanced toward the back of the room. Marcus was there, leaning against the wall like an invisible extra. His beige coat, his dark glasses, his discreet posture. Under his arm he carried the red envelope. No one noticed him. But I did. He gave a slight nod, almost imperceptible. It was the confirmation I needed. Everything was in place. Now I just needed to wait for Ethan to believe completely that he had one. Harper holds her hand, suspicious. We left the courthouse building under a cloudy sky. Ethan was surrounded by some acquaintances who were congratulating him. "It was better this way, without scandals," I heard one of them say. Ethan just smiled as if he were giving an interview. I moved away from the scene with Rachel and Harper. None of us said anything. Each of us knew the weight of that silence. Inside the car, I leaned my forehead against the window. Raindrops began to fall, timidly. But there was something liberating about that weather. As if the sky, even though it was gray, knew what was coming. Rachel looked at me in the rearview mirror. "Are you sure about what you did?" Her voice was low and respectful but firm. "I am," I replied without hesitating. "He thinks he won. And that is exactly what I needed." She nodded, though she still did not fully understand. Harper, in the back seat, crossed her arms thoughtfully. No one understood yet, but that did not bother me. The truth does not need to be told immediately to exist. That same evening, I received a message from Marcus. Short as always. Just 3 words. "Everything in motion." I deleted the message immediately and put the phone in the desk drawer. On top of the desk was a copy of the signed agreement. I looked at that paper like someone looking at a draft, not a sentence. He was taking everything. Inn's land, part of the bank account. But he did not take what really mattered. He did not take the truth, nor time. Marcus was moving through paths that Ethan would never imagine. And I, silently, prepared the stage for the final act. Every detail was being orchestrated with the patience my grandfather taught me. It was not about revenge. It was about justice. And about recovering what should never have been taken. Ethan slept peacefully, thinking himself safe. That gave me more strength than any victory. It is almost time. The road back seemed longer than before. The trees, the poles, the same open fields that once welcomed me now seemed to watch in silence everything I had lost. Noah and Lila slept in the back seat, their faces peaceful, oblivious to the invisible war their parents were fighting. The car moved slowly, and every kilometer took me further from the cold courtrooms and closer to the land where my grandfather built everything with his own hands. Clara was waiting for us on the porch, wearing an apron and an open soul. When I stopped the car, she opened her arms, and I walked into them like someone coming home. That house smelled of the past and courage. The walls knew our family's secrets, and the floor had already supported more pain than any modern court. The children ran through the hallways with the naturalness of those who still see the world in color. I, on the other hand, felt an invisible hole in my chest. A space that was once occupied by certainties. Now there was only waiting, but I was still whole. Because in the silence, I had discovered a type of strength Ethan would never understand. The type that does not need to prove anything. The three of us sat in the living room while Clara prepared tea and cakes. Noah watched me in silence, with that curious and unsettling look he inherited from his father. After a few minutes, he approached and sat beside me, leaning his head on my shoulder. "Mom," he said, almost in a whisper, "did you lose everything?" I was silent for a moment. I took a deep breath. I stared at the wooden ceiling and let the pain pass like a heavy cloud. The answer was already inside me. Noah asks, "Mom, did you lose everything?" I hugged Noah tighter, calmly stroking his hair. "Not everything," I replied softly. "I still have you." He said nothing, but his breathing became calmer. Lila, who until then had been playing with pieces of fabric on the floor, approached with attentive eyes. "Can we still live here forever?" she asked. I smiled and nodded. This will always be home. Even if the rest of the world turned upside down, that place would be the shelter for what mattered. The heart of what remained of our story. Lila ran to her backpack and took out a piece of paper folded several times. She handed it over delicately, like someone offering a treasure. It was a drawing. The three of us holding hands in front of the Valley Inn. The flowers were exaggerated, the faces were crooked, but there was truth there. At the top of the page she had written, "Hamilton family, strong version." My eyes filled with tears, but I held them back. It was not the time to break down. It was the time to save strength. I placed the drawing on the fireplace mantel, where the old family photos were kept. Side by side, the memories gained new color. The children continued playing, and I went to the room where I slept when I was a girl. The suitcases were leaning in the corner, and on top of the dresser, a portrait of my grandfather looked at me like someone who approved of what I had done. I took the portrait in my hands and whispered, "You taught me to wait." And I learned. On the other side of the house, I heard Clara turning on the light in the basement. It was the signal I needed. I walked there in silence with a calm but firm heart. I knew exactly what I needed to do. Lila hands over a drawing of everyone together. We went down the stairs slowly. The basement still had the same smell of rust and earth. The shelves covered in sheets, the old trunks, the pendulum clock stopped in the corner. Everything seemed frozen in time. Clara turned on the central light, revealing the safe built into the stone wall. It was the same one my grandfather used to store the inn's documents. I grew up seeing that safe as a symbol of responsibility, of trust. I took the red envelope out of my bag and held it for a moment. It was heavy, though made only of paper. Inside it was the evidence. The key to dismantling everything Ethan had built with lies. But more than that, inside that envelope was my choice. Not to strike back with hate. To wait for the right moment. To let the truth do the work that revenge would never do. I opened the safe with a combination I still remembered by heart. I turned the dial calmly, as if each number were a step toward liberation. When the door opened, I placed the envelope carefully among my grandfather's papers. I closed it firmly and locked it. That was not hiding. It was preserving, protecting the truth's time until it arrived. Because it would come, and when it did, no one could erase it. Clara remained in silence until I turned around. Then she approached, held my hand firmly, and said in a low but immensely clear voice, "You will open this on the right day," says Clara. The clock read 9:02 when I entered the courtroom. The air there was colder than I remembered, but my body was warm from so much waiting. Rachel walked beside me with firm steps, her eyes attentive to every detail. Harper was already in the reserved bench, dressed in black, as if she sensed the kind of ceremony this would become. Ethan entered last, accompanied by his lawyer, and upon seeing me, he smiled as if he were still winning. His confidence was a wall, and I was about to push it with a finger. He sat a few feet away from me, adjusted his tie, and whispered dismissively, "I hope you are at peace with your defeat." I looked at him for a second, and for the first time in a long time I saw a small man. The weight of my silence seemed to bother him more than any scream. Rachel discreetly handed me the red envelope under the table. I placed it on my lap, covering it with my hands. The judge entered and began the session, unaware that in minutes there would be no more session, but a spectacle. The hearing proceeded as expected, with the lawyers giving their reports, documents being mentioned, and the bureaucratic rituals of a closing. Ethan leaned back, occasionally exchanging glances with his allies, confident that this would be his grand finale. I maintained my posture, with the envelope firm under my hands. The right moment was everything, and I would wait until the exact second because that was my signature, to act when no one expected it. Rachel shot me a look. It was time. I stood up calmly and asked for the floor. The judge hesitated but granted it. I walked to him with soft but determined steps. I took out the red envelope and deposited it in front of him, as if it were living proof. "I would like this to be attached to the records. Now." He frowned, opened the envelope, and began to read. The room fell into absolute silence. Except for one thing. Ethan's rapid breathing. Murmurs began in the room. The murmurs began like small, discreet waves, but soon they took over the room like a storm. The pages passed from hand to hand. Bank documents, illegal transfers, forgeries, and frauds linked to Ethan's name. Every piece of evidence was a shovelful of dirt over the castle he believed he had built. Ethan shifted in his chair, trying to maintain his pose. But the color had fled from his face. His eyes searched for his lawyers, who now looked at him in panic. The judge raised his hand, calling for silence. He closed the envelope, adjusted his glasses, and called for an immediate break. "This content completely changes the nature of the proceedings. This hearing is suspended." The officers in the room looked at each other, not knowing what to expect. Ethan stood up, trying to argue, but the judge silenced him with a gesture. Rachel crossed her arms, looking at him like someone finally seeing the veil fall. Harper held the edge of the bench in shock, but with a slight smile of pride on her lips. Hurried footsteps echoed in the hallway seconds later. The doors burst open with a bang. 3 federal agents entered the room with rigid posture and determined looks. Everyone turned toward them. Ethan froze. His wide eyes turned to me, as if I were responsible for something he had provoked himself. And I was. But he never imagined that the quiet woman in front of him would be capable of taking him down with a single move. I simply looked at him, serene, like someone watching justice finally put on its boots. The agents approached without haste. One of them spoke his full name. Ethan tried to pull back, but his voice failed him. He tried to look at his lawyer, who did not respond. The handcuffs closed with a dry, cold, definitive click. Harper covered her mouth with her hand. Rachel smiled discreetly. And I just closed my eyes for a moment, feeling my body finally release the weight of years of silence. Ethan is led away in handcuffs. The judge's decision came out 2 weeks later, on a cold morning that seemed to already carry a new beginning. I was sitting next to Rachel when she opened the documents, one by one, with the care of someone returning pieces of a woman's own heart. All properties, accounts, and assets had been legally restored to my name. Ethan, now under federal investigation, no longer had a way to contest anything. Rachel turned to me, holding the last page with a firm smile on her lips. "It is all here. Official. Your name is back where it always belonged." My chest filled with a different kind of silence. It was no longer the silence of fear or waiting. It was the silence of something whole, reconnected. I took the papers with firm hands. As I touched them, I felt the weight of what I inherited and what I defended. Not out of vanity, but for justice. My grandfather's land had an owner again, and it was his name that pulsed behind mine. Returning to the valley Inn was like opening a window after a long time in the dark. The windows were closed, the curtains were dusty, but the foundation, that remained firm, like the memory of the person who built it with their heart. Harper arrived even before I asked for help. Then came neighbors, old employees, and young people from town with buckets and cloths. No one came for money. They came for history, for the strength that resists time. Gradually, every board was cleaned, every garden remade, and every wall painted. At the end of the afternoon, when the first sunflowers were planted, Harper approached and looked around with her arms crossed. "You are different," she said. "But you finally look whole. Now you are back." I smiled, and for the first time in a long time I felt the smile was mine. Not a response to the world, but a reflection of myself. Harper says, "Now you are back." Clara arrived at the end of the day, with her blue cotton skirt and tearful eyes. She did not need to say anything. I knew she had waited for this moment since the first day she saw me walk in with shoulders hunched from loss. She walked slowly to the entrance of the inn, and from her coat pocket, she took out a small set of keys. They were attached to an old keychain, worn by time, with my grandfather's name engraved by hand. "These were his. And now they are yours." Her voice was low but full of firmness. I reached out and received that symbol like someone holding a whole heart. The keys jangled between my fingers. Their sound was familiar, like a childhood memory of something that was always mine, even when they took it from me. I hugged my grandmother tightly. There was nothing more to say. The story was where it needed to be. That night, I lay in the bed of the master suite, now clean, restored, and alive. For the first time, I fell asleep without fear of what would come next. The walls seemed to breathe with me. I felt my grandfather there, in every detail he thought of, in every corner he built. "Silent achievements last longer," he used to say. And now I understood. My silence was not cowardice. It was maturation. And now, the sound of my victory was the ring of the keys in my hand. The legacy they tried to tear from me was there, intact. But I was no longer the same. I had learned to fight differently, to fall and get up with a purpose, to protect without fanfare what was mine by right. I looked out the inn window and saw Clara sitting on the porch, as she did when I was a child. She nodded her head, and I knew what she wanted to say. "It is all yours again." The cemetery was at the top of the hill, surrounded by ancient trees that seemed to whisper memories to the wind. I took Noah and Lila with me that Sunday morning. Not as a farewell, but as a visit to something that needed to be celebrated. My grandfather's grave was clean, with fresh flowers placed by Clara days before. I held the children's hands as we approached. There, before that headstone, everything that happened seemed to finally fit in one place. We stood in silence for a few minutes. The children respected this moment with a maturity that surprised me. Noah looked at me from the side and then turned his eyes back to the headstone. "Would he like you like this, Mommy?" he asked with a sincerity that pierced my chest. I looked at the sky for a moment, trying to contain my emotion. Then I reached down and touched the name engraved on the stone. Yes, Noah. He would recognize me. Truly. I sat on the grass and told them in simple words what had happened. I spoke about justice, about choices, and about silent courage. I said that sometimes winning is not about screaming the loudest, but staying firm when everything collapses. Lila approached, leaned her head on my shoulder, and replied with a sweetness that only she had. "We prefer you happy, Mommy, even if you are quieter." I laughed through tears. My children understood what the world had not yet understood. I looked at them and saw that what remained was in fact what mattered most. Their love. The living memory of my grandfather. Clara's respect. And my own reconstruction. I stood up slowly, with both of them by my side, and together we left the cemetery. The sun was beginning to peek through the clouds. Life, even with so many losses, still stretched out before me like a long road. And for the first time it was without fear. Lila replies, "We prefer you happy." At night, after the children were asleep, I sat alone on the inn's porch. The wood creaked under my bare feet, and the air was warm. I picked up my old hardback notebook, the same one my grandfather used for his notes, and began to write. But not about Ethan, nor about the court papers. I wrote to myself. A letter. Promise. Never doubt who you are again, I began with a steady hand. You survived. You won. And you are still here. Every word was a mirror. A reconstruction of what I had lost of myself. It was not a letter of closure, but of a new beginning. A letter I wanted to reread one day when the pain tried to convince me again that I was not enough. I kept the notebook in the bottom drawer of the desk, where true secrets have always been safe. I took a deep breath and closed my eyes for a moment. There was no more urgency, no more fear, only life. The furniture in the house still smelled of time, but now it seemed renewed. Everything around me was the past and the present merged into the same space. And I was part of it, not as a victim, but as a guardian. My grandfather's legacy was not just ins, contracts, and names. It was this ability to rebuild oneself without screaming, to get up without punching the world, and to move forward with a clear gaze. Perhaps I did not recover everything. Perhaps nothing will ever be as it was before. But what remained, that was mine. It was eternal. It was what really mattered. And for that reason, there on that porch under the clear sky and the approaching night, I smiled. Because now I knew. Perhaps what I have gained, no one else can take away. The flashes began as soon as the courtroom door opened. Reporters crowded outside, microphones raised like spears in search of blood. I came out escorted by Rachel and Marcus, who tried to clear the way firmly but without aggression. Questions came from all sides. How do you feel now? Was it hard to watch his arrest? Are you going to ask for compensation? I stopped, took a deep breath, and raised my eyes, facing the chaos with the serenity of someone who no longer needed to prove anything. I didn't come here to win, I said, my voice firm but contained. I came to restore what was taken, what belonged to me, what I built in silence. There was a brief silence, as if the microphones had forgotten how to work. I took advantage of the moment. It wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. And then I walked. Without screaming, without accusing, without raising trophies. I just left. Because the greatest answer had already been given. We got into the car and for a few seconds no one said a word. Rachel in the front seat sighed in relief. Marcus drove in silence, with the expression of a job well done. I leaned my head against the glass, watching the city pass by outside, like someone leaving a chapter behind. The courtroom walls became distant, but what happened inside would live in me forever. The weight of the weight had finally left my shoulders. The case was closed. Officially. Ethan would serve his sentence, and all the frauds were documented, recorded, and irrefutable. Marcus passed me a copy of the final report, and Rachel simply nodded. It was over. No, it was beginning now. It was not about revenge. It was about justice. That night, we sat in the inn's garden, everyone gathered together. Clara brought a bottle of wine that had been kept for years, and Harper, as always, grabbed the glasses with a glint in her eyes. The table was simple but carried immense symbolic weight. It was the dinner of a new beginning. I watched each of them in silence, needing no words. Marcus remained discreet, but with that calm look of someone who has seen a lot. Rachel, feeling lighter, drank slowly. Harper raised her glass. To those who wait for the right time. To those who act when everyone thinks they've given up. She looked directly at me. And to the silence. That screams louder than the scandal. Everyone toasted. And I smiled. Not with euphoria but with truth. It was a toast to strategy, to calmness, and to the emotional intelligence that many mistake for weakness. Ethan always screamed. I always waited. And that is what brought him down. That dinner was not a celebration of his fall, but of my staying power. It was about what remained standing even when they tried to demolish everything. About the bonds that resisted even when the structure shook. Clara looked at me with tearful but firm eyes. I knew what she saw. The granddaughter who once feared losing everything was now there, sitting at the table rebuilt, with even deeper roots. After the toast, we fell into silence. It was not the kind of meeting where everyone talks at once. It was the kind where everyone breathes together. Each one knew what it meant, and no one needed to explain. Not Harper, not Marcus, not Rachel. We just toasted, breathed, and remained there side by side. Harper proposes a toast, to the silence that screams louder than the scandal. The next morning I woke up before the sun. I put on a light blouse, tied my hair, and went out alone. The ground was still damp from the night dew, and the sound of the birds was the only noise nearby. I walked slowly to the entrance of the inn. It was there, alive, firm, clean, as if it had never been threatened. But I knew what it had faced, and I knew how hard we fought to keep it standing. I stopped in front of the main door where years ago my grandfather taught me to put up the first open sign. I touched the wood, feeling the familiar texture under my fingers. It was not just a building. It was part of my story, of what formed me, of what made me resist when everything said I should keep quiet. I closed my eyes for a moment. I took a deep breath. And in that sigh, I let the past go. The Evelyn who once feared losing everything no longer existed. In her place was a woman who learned that some battles are not won with force, but with patience. That some victories are not noisy but deep. That true power is not in bringing the other person down, but in not allowing them to break us. The door was closed, but I had the keys. And now I knew exactly what to do with them. I took a step back, looked at the sky that was beginning to brighten, and smiled. Because what I had protected, even in silence, had resisted. The inn, my children, my values. Ethan had tried to take everything. But he did not take what made me who I am. The legacy was intact. But I was changed forever. Now I am curious about you who heard my story. What would you do if you were in my shoes? Have you ever gone through something similar? Support the channel, subscribe, like, comment, and share this video. I am leaving another story on the end screen that you will also like, and it will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching. Until the next video.